Humans don't understand logistical restraint, written by Illwood _. Kobolds, by and large, do not have the aerobatic setup to smoke cigarettes when stressed. Like frogs, most of their air was intaken by the skin. So in order to absorb enough of the chemicals in a cigarette to feel affected by it, they had to create what humans would refer to as a hotbox environment. This meant that smoking was considerably less popular for kobolds than it was for other species, as the pure logistical considerations were a pain. Still, Grand Marshal Yogutia had been young once, and she had developed a fondness for smoking by second-hand consumption while on board a Drax ship. She was no longer the young frog she had once been, and no longer surrounded by Drax. But whenever things got stressful and it was her job to take charge, oh, how she envied her younger self. She licked her eyes slowly and deliberately, the Kobola equivalent of squeezing the bridge of one's nose. As Grand Marshal, she was responsible for the military presence in an entire solar system, a rather important link in the chain that was the Kobola's military complex. A link which now, thanks to some foolishness, now stood on its own, cut off from core systems and a move by the enemies which had been equal parts bold and plainly obvious. The XT were by and large not considered to be good war fighters. Their shock impulse was high, so any significantly damaging blow could easily knock their warriors out for good, much the same as a horse not being able to survive a broken leg. Their bodies resembled round furry balls which sat upon 4 legs. Underneath their central ball was their mouth and a set of 4 highly flexible manipulator arms. Sitting between their 4 legs, spaced equally around their body, were 4 sets of eyes, for a total of 8. These eyes were rather underdeveloped, being able to detect motion but little else, not to mention extremely short-sighted. Instead, they saw using bizarre examples of echolocation. They had highly sensitive ear-like organs which ran around the outside of their mouth, almost as if they had a hole filled lips. It goes without saying that some species found the XT's mouths to be utterly horrifying. Their voice box was able to emit a ping noise while their mouths was eating, drinking, or being otherwise occupied. Their ear lips when processed this ping into a surprisingly detailed version of sight. XT could see far better than most species using this ability, but were also highly vulnerable to being deafened. The position of their best senses, the fragile nature of their arms, and the limited motion of their legs makes hand-to-hand combat extremely unpractical for the XT. It is theorized that if their world had developed any form of predator, then they would never have survived the process of becoming the spacefaring civilization. But they did survive, and now that most combat was undertaken by hulking spaceships and mass-produced drones, suddenly combat was becoming a whole lot more viable for them. In short, they had gotten rather uppity recently, and now the Kobolds were paying the price. Kobolds weren't much of a warrior species either, at least not when compared to the more violent examples of the galaxy. But they weren't completely without historical combat experience like the XT. Kobolds were short, stocky, green humanoids, so 2 arms, 2 legs, body and a head, etc., with large eyes and very long tongues. They used their long tongues to capture food, such as large bugs, right out of the air. Although they can eat wild bugs and the like, they much prefer prepared meals. They can also eat more normal sources of protein just fine, although their digestive system struggles with high-fat diets. However, most find food that doesn't wiggle a little when you eat it to be rather bland. Kobolds being amphibians does mean that they have some disadvantages when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, as their skin is very easily pierced. But as they evolved and took their space amongst the galactic powers, they had proven themselves to be solidly second-rate. Considering some of the galactic powers included self-replicating machines specifically designed for war, which had them overthrown their controlling masters, second-rate was nothing to scoff at. All this was, of course, a rather long-winded way of saying that the Kobolds had gotten themselves blindsided by the XT. The XT had launched an obvious attack on Kobola territory, with the intention to cut off the 4 solar systems from the Kobola core worlds and claim the systems as their own. Why was this so obvious? Because the XT had straight up told the Kobolds their attack plan when they had declared war. The plan was simple. The XT would split their forces into 2 groups, Claw and Talon, had attacked the systems of Rima and Joey 3. Once taken, the two groups would coordinate with one another to ensure a synced arrival at Rico. Rico was the closest of the 4 systems to the Kubola's core, so its defenses were the strongest of the 4 targets they planned to attack. Once Rico was taken, the two groups would combine into one and push towards their last target, which was the unnamed colony that Ugut was responsible for. Upon receiving information on the plan, the Kubolas had then proceeded to make 2 faulty assumptions. Firstly, the Kubolas had overestimated the XT, not believing that they would ever be stupid enough to attack exactly where and when they had said they were going to attack. Who would be dumb enough to give their enemies so much strategic information? Secondly, the Kubolas had underestimated the XT, believing that the defenses of the systems in question would be powerful enough to hold off an XT attack until reinforcements had arrived, if indeed an attack came at all. Now Ugut was paying the price for that arrogance. The XT had voyage jumped their entire army, smacked bang into the teeth of the Kubola defenses at Rima and Joy 3, and then proceeded to fight their way through, capturing 2 Kubola systems before a shocked military apparatus had a chance to respond. Then, instead of resisting or even regrouping, the XT pushed forward to their 3rd system. At Rico, they once again jumped straight into the defense's teeth and once again won the fight before the Kubola's Republic got so much as a word in. The amount of paralyzation in the Kubola's navy cannot be overestimated. From the defender's perspective, the attacks the XT mounted were practically suicidal. It wasn't so much as warfare as it was simply bashing the enemy to death with their bodies of their own comrades. It horrified the Kubolas, while also proving to be unbelievably effective and unbelievably costly. In intergalactic wars in the past, it had been rare for Kubola fleets to lose more than 10% of their number in combat. The XT after Rico had lost no less than 2/3. To make matters worse, it was patently obvious that the XT didn't have a clue as to how real warfare went. As soon as they had defeated the defenses at the systems, they had just as quickly abandoned them, seemingly under the assumption that the Kubolas would now consider this territory lost. Under the assumption that war was a fair game, one filled with unspoken gentlemen's agreements and guidelines. As the XT force merged its 2 shattered fleets into one and pushed towards Uguti, they thought that they were done. They expected nothing more than the colony's standard defense fleet, good for pirate control and nothing else. They were about to learn a painful lesson. The enemy always has a say in your plans. It was here that Uguti's part in the story began. She would go down in history simply because she had taken the threat semi-seriously. Her system was nothing more than a small colony, just barely starting out, not even fully self-sufficient. But she had petitioned her government repeatedly in order to gain a defense network that was at least as robust as the forces at Remuth and Joey 3 deployed. Her stubbornness had paid dividends, and when the drained XT force jumped into her system, she had been ready. It was safe to say that the XT forces had a traumatic introduction to the art of warfare, as throwing yourself directly into overlapping railgun fire tends to have that effect. But they had proven victorious, at least. Their losses balanced by the 3 highly developed systems that they had gained. This 4th colony was simply a grand finale. One last battle against what would no doubt be, and had been before the war was announced, a tiny defense network consisting of a single frigate and 3 corvettes. Instead, the XT were met with a full-sized a cruiser flanked by a pair of destroyers, 3 groups of 4 frigates, 2 groups to escort the destroyers, and 1 group to perform deadly hit-and-run tactics. Filling out the bulk of the fleet, nothing short of 60 corvettes, each ready and willing to take direct hits in order to protect their bigger and much more vulnerable sisters. Oh, and let's not forget, the original defense force for the colony was still there, from pirates to warships. They weren't going to let their colony down. Even with the force Uguti had procured for her system, the XT had the numbers and the combat weight necessary to win the battle. In theory. But the difference between practice and theory is greater in practice than it is in theory. The XT crews lacked the will to keep fighting. Morale had been broken by the slaughter of their comrades. Supplies were running low, ships were still burning from the previous battles, and the engineers on board them were exhausted. The XT had proved that they were a civilization that should be taken seriously when it came to combat, but it was clear how naive their leadership was. It was clear where the failure lay. The XD force may not have engaged Yuguti's battle group at all, but as they were heading for home, the admiral of the fleet received the devastating news. The Kuboters had refused to acknowledge XD ownership of their systems and had swiftly retaken them. 2/3 for a once mighty fronting force had been lost for nothing. The resources, the money, the time, the people that had taken to pull off this war. Now the admiral and the XD government were staring down a possibility that it all might have been wasted. Was this not how wars were fought? Other galactic powers exchanged territories all the time. The XD had given them their combat plans. They had told the Kuboters of their intentions every step of the way. They had earned that territory through the sacrifice of XD's best. There had been a million ways to take the systems they wanted. They could have developed a plague or simply wiped out every Kuboter in the galaxy. But they had chosen to be honorable, and now the Kuboter Republic would take that all away. To the Kuboters, the XD seemed fools. To the XD, the Kuboters seemed like double-dealing devils. The admiral of the XD fleet had no other option. Accepting the loss of so many, and only to gain nothing, was ultimately unacceptable. He pushed his broken men forward. Yuguti's battle group was outnumbered, but well supplied, well repaired, and motivated. They couldn't defeat the XD, but as the sky of their small world lights up, as two fleets clashed, as lightning, thunder, and rail cannons flew through the void, they came to a simple realization. They could hold the line, which was exactly what they did. For 3 days and 2 nights, Yuguti and her battle group held the line, giving more losses than they took, shrugging off more damage than they dished back, until the XD were forced to relent, until the XD were half the strength that they had warped in with, now merely 15% of their original number. But the XD did not leave. They could not leave. Too many had died, too much taken, too far gone. Thus the siege of Yuguti's colony began. The XD cut off all supplies to Yuguti's people and her forces, demanding that the Kuboters respect the honorable war that they had sought to fight. It was around this moment that the galactic community got involved, seeking a peaceful resolution to the conflict, not wanting to unleash a bitter and unhinged XD onto the grand starlit stage, but likewise not wanting to isolate the steadfast support found in the Kuboters Republic. A third species would host peace talks between the Kuboters and the XD. It would be up to them to educate, negotiate, and goad the two species into a resolution the Galactic Summit would respect. A tall ask, for sure. Both sides had already lost so many lives to the war, one which the XD had started. But the galactic community had an ace up their sleeves, the perfect species to sweet-talk the two alien races back into their peaceful coexistence. Humanity. A wonderful, misguided, bloody and brutal humanity. New on the intergalactic stage, human represented the ultimate neutral party, as this was likely the first time any human diplomat would have even heard of the two species, as XD and Kuboter space was basically on the opposite side of the very big galaxy compared to humanity and its home world. Humanity. The species that had more experience fighting wars than any other, simply because it had spent so much of its history trying to kill itself. A snake eating its own tail. One which had learned from its past conflicts. A species that had grown gentle and understanding and wise. If there was anyone who would know how foolish this war was, who had direct examples that they could point at in their own history, it was them. But even for their skilled diplomats of humanity, such negotiations took time. Time Yuguti didn't have. Her colony hadn't been able to support itself even before this whole war kicked off, and now she had an entire battle group to feed. The crews of those ships were landing on her world in droves, attempting to rapidly grow what they lacked. But not every soldier could farm. The ships had to stay crewed in case the fighting resumed, and everyone needed to sleep. It simply wasn't enough. What farms weren't fading couldn't produce what she needed given a year, let alone the time she actually had. But if she gave the order to break and blockade, it would be kicking the ultimate hornet's nest. The past few weeks of fighting would be nothing compared to a full-scale war between the two species. Potentially even an existential war, putting one or both species at risk of potential extinction. There was some good news, however. The humans had negotiated a supply convoy. Only a single one. The XD wanted to keep the Kuboters pressured after all. But it would buy her people some time. A month, maybe. That assumes the humans could supply roughly as much as the Kuboter Republic could. But the Kablos could only do that if the entire Republic threw their logistical resources into the mix, considering the time that they had been given. Would humans do such a thing, or a species they hadn't even met yet? If she had a month, she could probably be self-sustaining, so long as she was willing to work her people ragged. A brutal month to barely come up with enough calories for almost 2 million hungry mouths. But the humans couldn't provide her with a month. A rapid beeping threw her from her train of thought. The reason why she was in command in center to begin with had just jumped into the system. The human convoy, the one that could very well determine the fate of 2 spacefaring species, had arrived. And it was fucking massive. Uguti had to double-check to make sure that XT hadn't just jumped another fleet in. Forget equaling the Kablos-sized convoy. What Uguti was looking at could have matched, if not beaten, the tonnage of the entire Kabloa Navy. Her tongue froze on one of her eyes as she read the information the sensors were providing. 600 massive X-shaped ships, each loaded with 100 detachable cargo containers, now filled the void above her world. Each container was roughly the size of an old Earth football field. Each was self-sustained, with its own life support system, maneuvering thrusters, power supplies, and low-level AIs. Humans had put together this in only 2 of their standard months. Uguti felt as though she was looking at the entirety of the Kabloa shipping for a year. It simply dwarfed anything that she could have ever expected. The massive ships dropped off their containers in a geostationary orbit, allowing the Kablos to access their supplies as needed. They had also included a manifest that was nothing short of mind-boggling. From cargo shuttles to fireworks, from tractors to seeds, from dense nutritional paste to ice cream, from cars to boats. Some of the containers could also be deorbited and landed on the planet, whereupon they could act as entire industrial or agricultural facilities, warehouses or factories, mills, bakeries, sawmills, and malls. The admiral of the cargo fleet even joked about providing a Burger King, whatever the hell that was. Uguti took a long time to compose herself before thanking the admiral profusely on behalf of her entire republic. The human just laughed, said something about third delivery this week, and jumped out of the war zone. It would take almost 3 years for the siege to be lifted. The Kablos got to keep their systems, but vowed that no retaliatory action would befall the XT, who had already lost so much. The XT, for their part, were graciously given a single system by the humans. It was on the other side of the galaxy, yes, and completely uninhabited to boot, but its resources would help fuel the new economic boom for the misguided government. Humanity would benefit immensely from their new trading partner, as their corner of the galaxy was remarkably empty. As for Uguti and her colony, she may have benefited most of all. What had been a colony of merely 100,000 Kablos was now a blooming world. The extra population in the form of the battle group and all of the industrial resources humanity had supplied kick-started a massive wave of technological progress. By the time the war was officially over, Uguti's world would rival the more developed systems that had once been the XT's primary targets. A few decades later, and combined with its proximity to XT, who had become important trading partners for the Kablo's military apparatus, the colony had grown to be one of the most important in the sector. It would remain unnamed for decades, as Uguti insisted the colony be named after the human supply fleet admiral, while most others wanted to name it after her. Ironically enough, this saved it from attack by an out-of-control drone swarm, as the solar system was labeled as null value in their database. But that story is for another day. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.